I never imagined love could feel this heavy. Not at first. At first, it felt like purpose. Like destiny had finally tapped me on the shoulder and said, "This is why you're strong." I met him at a moment when he had nothing but potential and pain. Dreams with no direction. Talent with no discipline. And eyes that looked like they'd already lost too much. I noticed that before anything else. People say you shouldn't fall for broken men. But nobody ever talks about how broken men know exactly how to find women who know how to survive. Women who learned early how to carry weight without complaining. Women who confuse love with endurance. That was me. I became his shelter before I even realized I was building walls around myself. I listened to his fears at 2 a.m., held his hand through failures he never planned for, defended him in rooms he wasn't even invited into yet. When he doubted himself, I believed louder. When the world told him no, I whispered not yet. And slowly, subtly, my life started orbiting his. My schedule bent around his moods. My savings dissolved into temporary help. My dreams learned how to wait patiently in the corner. Every time he fell apart, I showed up with glue and reassurance, telling myself this is what love looks like when it's real. But nobody warned me that love can turn into labor. Nobody warned me that support, given endlessly, becomes invisible. There were signs. I see them now. How my exhaustion became an inconvenience. How my tears made him uncomfortable. How my strength, once admired, became expected. I stopped being a woman he loved and became a resource he relied on. Still, I stayed. Because I thought loyalty was proven in storms. Because I believed if I just held on a little longer, we'd arrive together at something beautiful. Because I told myself he would never leave after everything I did. That thought felt like insurance. I didn't know it was a lie. And if you're still here listening, if this already feels familiar, take a moment to like this story. Not for me, but for yourself. Because sometimes hearing the truth is the first step toward surviving it. I remember the exact moment everything shifted. The day I finally needed him. It wasn't dramatic. No screaming. No accident. Just a quiet collapse inside my chest that I couldn't hold together alone anymore. I reached for him the way he had reached for me 100 times before. And for the first time, he wasn't there. That's when I realized something terrifying. I had carried us for so long, I didn't know how to stand when I finally let the weight drop. And that was only the beginning. Needing help felt unnatural to me. That's the first thing I noticed. My body knew something my mind didn't want to accept, that I had been strong for so long, weakness felt like a foreign language. I didn't know how to ask without apologizing. I didn't know how to need without feeling like I was failing some invisible test I had been passing my whole life. The truth is, I didn't even collapse all at once. I leaked. Little by little. Sleep stopped working the way it used to. Food lost its taste. My chest felt tight in that quiet, private way doctors can never diagnose properly. I told myself I was just tired. Just overwhelmed. Just going through a phase. That's what women like me do. We minimize pain until it becomes unignorable. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed one night, staring at the wall, my phone face down beside me. I wanted to call him. I needed to. Not for reassurance. Not for advice. Just for presence. Just for someone to say, "I've got you the way you've always had me." But my fingers hesitated. Because somewhere along the way, I had learned that his needs were urgent, and mine were optional. When I finally spoke, my voice didn't sound like mine anymore. It was quieter. Careful. Like I was asking for a favor instead of support. "I'm not okay," I said. He didn't look up right away. That pause, that tiny delay, did something irreversible inside me. I felt myself register it as danger before my heart caught up. His attention used to snap toward my voice. Used to soften. Used to lean in. Now it felt, weighed. Distracted. Almost annoyed. He sighed. Not a loud one. Not dramatic. Just enough. I didn't know it was this serious, he said. Not I'm here. Not tell me more. Just that. Serious. As if pain needs permission to exist. I tried to explain, but my words kept tripping over themselves. How tired I was. How empty. How everything I used to carry so well suddenly felt impossible to lift. I told him I was scared, and even as I said it, I hated myself for admitting that. He listened the way someone listens when they're already late for something else. That's when I understood something brutal. He didn't know how to hold me. Or worse, he never had to learn. Because I had always held myself. And him. I watched his face for signs of recognition. Of empathy. Of memory, reminders of the nights I stayed awake talking him through his breakdowns, the mornings I showed up exhausted but smiling, the sacrifices I never listed out loud. But his eyes didn't reflect gratitude. They reflected pressure. My pain had become another responsibility. Another burden. Another thing pulling from him instead of feeding him. He started pulling away in subtle ways after that. Less checking in. Shorter replies. Conversations that stayed on the surface like he was afraid depth might demand something of him. When I cried, he grew uncomfortable. When I went quiet, he seemed relieved. I realized then that my strength had spoiled him. He had learned to love a version of me that never needed anything back. And the moment I broke that illusion, the moment I stopped being unbreakable. I stopped being convenient. If you've ever been the strong one, the dependable one, the woman everyone leans on, you already know this part hurts differently. If this is resonating, take a second and leave a like. Stories like this survive because people recognize themselves inside them. The cruelest part wasn't his distance. It was how he justified it. He started saying things like, "I don't know how to help you. I'm just trying to protect my own peace. I feel like you're changing." As if my pain was a personality flaw. As if needing support was a betrayal of who I had been for him. I wanted to scream that I was changing because I was finally human again. That strength without rest turns into something brittle. That even pillars crack when they carry too much weight for too long. But I didn't scream. I swallowed it. Like I always did. Until one day, I realized something terrifying. I was starting to disappear, not because he left yet, but because I was still trying to earn care from someone who had already taken everything he needed from me. And deep down, I felt it coming. The moment where he wouldn't just pull away quietly anymore. The moment he would finally say the thing I wasn't ready to hear. He didn't leave all at once. That's the lie people tell, that abandonment is loud, obvious, undeniable. That someone packs a bag, slams a door, and disappears in a single moment that changes everything. No. He left the way cowards usually do. In pieces. First, he stopped asking questions. Not just the deep ones, "How are you really?" But the small ones that show presence. "Did you eat? Did you get home okay?" Those questions vanished quietly, like they had never existed. Our conversations became transactional. Functional. Weather updates. Logistics. Silence padded with words that didn't mean anything. Then he stopped seeing me. I was still in the room. Still speaking. Still breathing beside him at night. But his eyes were elsewhere. On his phone. On his future. On a version of life that didn't require emotional labor. I watched him laugh at messages I couldn't see, smile at ideas he didn't include me in. He started talking about independence like it was a new religion, something sacred he had just discovered, conveniently after I started needing support. I remember the night I realized I was alone. Not single. Alone. We were sitting on opposite sides of the couch, the TV playing something neither of us was watching. I was curled into myself, knees pulled close, my body instinctively trying to conserve what little warmth it had left. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. If he knew me at all, he would have noticed. He didn't. That silence screamed louder than any argument we'd ever had. I felt something detach inside me then, not a clean break, but a tear. Like fabric slowly ripping under pressure. I wanted to reach for him. I wanted to ask if he still saw me. If he still cared. If everything I gave had meant anything at all. But I already knew the answers. Because when a man starts preparing his exit, he stops investing in your survival. He framed it as growth. I think we're just in different places, he said one evening, like he was reading from a script he had practiced in his head. I'm finally getting my life together. I need space to focus. Space. That word felt violent in his mouth. Because space was exactly what I had never been allowed when he was falling apart. There was no space then, only urgency. Only expectation. Only me showing up again and again because love, apparently, meant availability without limits. I asked him if he remembered who he was when we met. He nodded. I asked him who stood beside him when nobody else did. He went quiet. That's when I knew. He remembered. He just didn't want to owe me. Because gratitude creates responsibility. And responsibility was something he was no longer willing to carry. The night he said he needed to figure things out alone, my body reacted before my mind did. My hands shook. My throat closed. I felt smaller than I had in years, not because I had lost him, but because I had finally seen myself through his eyes. I wasn't a partner anymore. I was a chapter he had already finished reading. If you're listening to this and your chest feels tight right now, you're not weak, you're remembering. Leave a comment if this story is touching something personal. You don't have to explain it. Just let yourself be seen. I didn't beg. That part surprises people when they hear my story. I didn't beg because something inside me was already done. Already exhausted. Already grieving a relationship that had died long before the words caught up. What I did instead was ask one last question. Do you still love me, I said, or do you just love what I gave you? He didn't answer right away. And that hesitation told me everything. Because love doesn't pause to calculate. Love doesn't need time to decide. He said he cared about me. He said I was important. He said I deserved someone who could give me what I needed. And in that moment, I understood the cruelest truth of all. He was leaving not because I had failed him, but because I had finally stopped being useful. That night, after he went to sleep, peaceful, unbothered, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of a man resting comfortably on the foundation I had destroyed myself to build. And I made a decision. Not to chase. Not to convince. Not to shrink myself back into the woman who never needed anything. But to remember something I had forgotten. I was strong before him. And whatever came next, would not be built on sacrifice alone. People think the worst part is when they leave. It isn't. The worst part comes after, when the silence settles in and you're left alone with the truth you avoided for years. When your body finally relaxes enough to feel everything you postponed just to survive. He didn't disappear immediately. Not physically. But emotionally, he was already gone. We moved around each other like strangers sharing a memory. Conversations felt forced, polite, careful. I stopped reaching for him in my sleep. He stopped noticing. The bed felt bigger somehow, like the space between us had grown teeth. What nobody prepares you for is how abandonment doesn't just take someone away, it dismantles your sense of reality. I started questioning everything. Was I ever loved, or just needed? Were the sacrifices mutual, or was I the only one bleeding quietly? Did he leave because I changed, or because I finally revealed who I really was? I replayed moments obsessively. Nights I stayed strong when I wanted to collapse. Times I swallowed disappointment to keep the peace. All the ways I had taught him, unintentionally, that my needs were optional. And that realization hurt more than his absence. Because it meant I had helped build the version of him who could walk away. I remember standing in the bathroom one morning, staring at my reflection. My eyes looked older. Not tired, emptied. Like something sacred had been drained out of me without my consent. I whispered, "Who are you now?" And the silence didn't answer. That's when the anger started creeping in, not loud, explosive anger, but something colder. Something sharp. The kind that asks dangerous questions. Why was I ashamed of needing him, when he had never been ashamed of needing me? Why was my vulnerability treated like a burden, while his had been treated like a bond? Why did I feel guilty for collapsing under weight I was never meant to carry alone? I realized then that I wasn't just grieving him. I was grieving myself. The woman I had been before love taught her to disappear for the comfort of someone else. If this story is hitting close to home, take a second to like it. Not because it's sad, but because it's honest. And honesty is how we start taking ourselves back. The day he finally said he was leaving wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No tears. Just a sentence delivered calmly, like a business decision. I think this is what's best for both of us. Both of us. I nodded, because my body didn't have the energy to argue with a lie that clean. Inside, something ancient and feminine shattered, not loudly, but completely. The kind of break that doesn't bleed immediately, but changes how you walk forever. He packed slowly. Carefully. I watched him fold clothes I had washed, organize things I had paid for, gather pieces of a life I had helped assemble. Every movement felt surreal, like I was observing a stranger robbing my own house with my permission. He hugged me before he left. That hug felt like closure for him. For me, it felt like erasure. When the door closed, I didn't cry. I sat on the floor. I stayed there for hours, surrounded by quiet so loud it made my ears ring. No music. No phone. No distractions. Just me and the echo of everything I had ignored. And in that stillness, a terrifying thought surfaced. What if the reason this hurts so much is because I never learned how to receive? What if I believed love had to be earned through sacrifice? What if my strength was never the problem, but the way I offered it without boundaries? That night, something inside me shifted. Not healing. Not peace. Something darker. Something honest. I wasn't thinking about revenge the way movies show it. I was thinking about justice. Internal justice. The kind where you stop abandoning yourself just to prove you're worthy of staying. And for the first time since he left, I didn't miss him. I missed the woman I had been before I confused love with endurance. And I wanted her back. No matter what it took. The days after he left blurred together. Not because I was busy, but because I wasn't. Silence has a way of stretching time. Hours felt elastic. Mornings arrived without purpose. Nights came too early and stayed too long. I stopped measuring my life in plans and started measuring it in endurance. But something strange happened once the shock wore off. I started remembering myself. Not the version of me he knew. Not the woman who held everything together with clenched teeth and quiet pride. The woman before him. She showed up in fragments at first. In old playlists I hadn't touched in years. In clothes I used to wear before comfort became my priority. In the way my thoughts wandered when nobody needed anything from me. And every memory felt like an accusation. You didn't disappear. You were erased. I realized how much of myself I had put on pause. Friendships that faded because I was always supporting him. Ambitions that felt too loud for a relationship built on emotional fragility. Boundaries I never enforced because I mistook flexibility for love. I had been loyal to a fault. But loyalty without self-respect is just self-abandonment with a prettier name. One afternoon, I found an old journal buried in a drawer. The pages smelled like dust and time. I opened it carefully, like it might accuse me too. It did. I read words written by a woman who trusted herself. Who believed in her intuition. Who promised she would never shrink for love. I laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, but because it hurt. How did you let this happen? I asked the empty room. The truth came back immediately. Because being needed felt like being chosen. Because I thought love meant proving I was irreplaceable. Because somewhere deep down, I believed if I stopped being useful, I would stop being loved. That belief didn't come from him. It came from long before. If this realization feels familiar, if you're recognizing patterns you've never named before, pause and like this story. Healing starts with recognition, and recognition is never comfortable. The anger I felt toward him started to shift. Not disappear. Refocus. I stopped imagining conversations where I explained myself better. Stopped fantasizing about him realizing what he lost. Those fantasies were just another way of centering someone who had already exited my life. Instead, my thoughts turned inward. Why had I ignored the early signs? Why did I silence myself to preserve something already cracking? Why did I equate love with depletion? These questions didn't offer comfort. They offered power. Because for the first time, I wasn't asking why he left. I was asking why I stayed. One night, as I lay in bed, alone, but finally honest, I felt something unfamiliar. Relief. Not happiness. Relief. The kind that comes when you realize you no longer have to audition for care. When you no longer have to be impressive to be kept. When the weight you carried for years is finally on the ground, even if your arms still ache from holding it too long. I wasn't healed. But I was awake. And awakening is dangerous. Because once you see yourself clearly, you can never go back to being invisible again. I didn't know yet what I was going to do with this clarity. But I knew one thing for certain. I would never again build a life where love required my disappearance. And the woman I left behind. She was coming back. The first thing I stopped doing was explaining. I didn't announce my growth. I didn't post quotes. I didn't send closure messages wrapped in grace. I simply withdrew my energy, and for people used to feeding on it, that felt like an attack. Silence became my language. Not the wounded silence that waits to be noticed, but the kind that doesn't need permission. I stopped responding right away. Stopped softening my words. Stopped making myself emotionally available to people who only showed up when they needed something. Including him. He reached out eventually. Not with an apology. Not with accountability. Just curiosity. "How are you?" he asked, weeks after leaving, like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't bled quietly while he rebuilt himself on the foundation I laid. I stared at the message longer than I want to admit. The old me would have answered carefully. Warmly. Honestly. As if access to my inner world was still a right he possessed. But I wasn't her anymore. "I'm good," I replied. 2 words. No explanation. No emotional labor. No invitation. That response unsettled him more than anger ever could. Because men like him aren't afraid of rage, they're afraid of irrelevance. I noticed how people reacted to the new boundaries. Some respected them. Others tested them. A few tried to guilt me back into my old role, the listener, the fixer, the emotional safety net. I didn't fight them. I simply didn't show up. And that's when I learned something powerful. The version of me people miss is usually the version that benefited them most. I started rebuilding my life in quiet ways. Therapy. Long walks with no destination. Music loud enough to drown out old narratives. I learned how to sit with discomfort instead of rushing to make it useful. I learned that peace isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives slowly, when you stop betraying yourself for connection. If this shift resonates with you, leave a like. Not because it's pretty, but because it's necessary. He reached out again. This time, longer messages. Reminiscing. Soft regret disguised as nostalgia. He mentioned how strong I always was. How supportive. How he hoped I hadn't changed too much. That line made my stomach tighten. Too much. As if my growth was something to be moderated for his comfort. I didn't respond. And in that silence, I felt something click into place. I wasn't punishing him. I was protecting myself. There's a difference. I stopped romanticizing my suffering. Stopped seeing my endurance as a badge of honor. I began asking a simple question before every emotional investment. Is this mutual? If the answer wasn't clear, the answer was no. I wasn't becoming cold. I was becoming selective. And selectivity feels cruel to people who benefited from your lack of boundaries. Late one night, as I lay in bed, I realized something that would have terrified the old me. I no longer needed him to understand. Understanding had never saved me. Self-respect had. And the most unsettling part. I didn't feel empty anymore. I felt dangerous. Not to others. To old patterns. To expectations. To the version of myself that thought love meant disappearing. Whatever came next wouldn't be soft. It would be honest. It always happens after the silence. Not immediately, but right when they sense you've stopped waiting. He didn't show up with flowers or grand gestures. He came back the way uncertain men do, cautiously, strategically, testing the ground before stepping fully in. I've been thinking about us, he said over the phone, his voice softer than I remembered. I think I made a mistake. Those words used to be my fantasy. Now they felt late. I listened without interrupting. Not because I was captivated, but because I was curious. Curious to see if he would finally say the things that mattered. He talked about stress. Timing. Pressure. How lost he had been. How much I meant to him. He spoke in circles that never quite landed on responsibility. Not once did he say, I hurt you. Not once did he ask what leaving had done to me. That told me everything. He missed the version of me that made his life easier, not the woman I had become by surviving without him. When he asked if we could meet, my body answered before my heart did. No anxiety. No hope. No dread. Just clarity. I agreed. Not because I wanted him back. But because I wanted to see who I was now when standing in front of him. We met at a cafe we used to love. He smiled when he saw me, like he was relieved I still looked familiar. Still approachable. Still safe. But something shifted when he started talking. He kept referencing the past, inside jokes, old struggles, shared sacrifices, as if memory itself could restore access. It couldn't. I noticed how he avoided my eyes when conversations turned serious. How he softened his voice when he wanted reassurance. How he waited for me to fill emotional gaps like I always used to. I didn't. When he said, You've changed, I nodded. I had to, I replied. That sentence landed harder than any accusation. He asked if I still loved him. I took a breath before answering, not because I was unsure, but because honesty deserves respect. I care about you, I said. But I love myself more now. That silence between us was different. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Real. If this moment feels powerful to you, if you've ever fantasized about finally saying the right thing, leave a like. Not for closure, but for courage. He looked confused. Almost wounded. You're being distant, he said. I almost laughed. Distance is what happens when you stop overextending. He tried to explain himself again, how he wasn't ready back then, how he needed space, how he had always known I was strong enough to handle it. That last part did it. Strong enough to handle it. I leaned forward slightly. That wasn't love, I said quietly. That was convenience. His face tightened. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't loud. I was accurate. And accuracy is devastating to people who survive on denial. He left that cafe without asking to try again. Because deep down, he knew. The woman sitting across from him could no longer be molded into something manageable. That night, I didn't feel victorious. I felt clean. Like I had finally told the truth out loud, not to him, but to myself. And in doing so, I closed a door I had been guarding long after the house had already burned down. After that meeting, something unexpected happened. Nothing. No dramatic fallout. No sudden emptiness. No urge to rehash the conversation in my head 100 different ways. Just stillness. The kind that feels unfamiliar when your nervous system has been trained on chaos. I kept waiting for the delayed pain, the second wave of grief, the regret that people warn you about when you finally close a door for good. It never came. Instead, I noticed how peaceful my mornings felt. How my body no longer braced itself when my phone buzzed. How I no longer rehearsed emotional explanations in the shower or imagined future conversations that would never happen. I had stopped living in response to him. And that was freedom. I realized something important during that time: closure isn't something someone gives you. It's something you take when you stop asking questions that keep you stuck in the past. I didn't need him to admit fault. I didn't need an apology that came too late to matter. I needed to trust my own experience. And once I did, everything softened. I started making decisions without consulting ghosts. I redecorated my space, not dramatically, just enough to make it mine again. I reclaimed small rituals. Morning coffee without distraction. Long showers with no mental negotiations. Evenings spent doing nothing, and not feeling guilty about it. That's when I noticed how much of my life had been built around anticipation. Waiting for him to be ready. Waiting for him to choose me fully. Waiting for proof that my sacrifices had meaning. I wasn't waiting anymore. If you're still listening, still walking through this with me, take a second to subscribe and leave a like. Stories like this reach the people who need them most when you engage. I didn't become hard. That's the part people misunderstand. I became clear. Clear about what I offer. Clear about what I deserve. Clear about the difference between intimacy and obligation. I noticed how differently people treated me when I stopped overgiving. Some drifted away quietly. Others tried to pull me back into old dynamics with nostalgia and subtle guilt. I let them go. Not angrily. Intentionally. Because every time I chose peace over proving myself, I felt stronger in a way that didn't require performance. One night, as I lay in bed, I realized something that surprised me. I no longer replayed our story to understand what went wrong. I understood it. And understanding didn't hurt anymore. It felt complete. I thought about the woman I was when this all began, the one who thought love meant endurance, loyalty meant self-erasure, and strength meant never asking for help. She wasn't stupid. She was surviving with the tools she had. But I have better tools now. And the quiet confidence that came with that realization was more powerful than any revenge fantasy I could have imagined. Because the truth is, the greatest consequence of leaving someone who carried you is realizing they no longer need to carry anyone at all. I didn't announce my healing. It showed up in the way I moved through the world. In how I no longer rushed to fill silence. In how I chose rest without explaining it. In how my laughter came back, softer at first, then fuller, like a sound my body remembered before my mind did. My life stopped feeling like a reaction. It started feeling intentional. I noticed how differently I breathed when no one was draining me emotionally. How my shoulders sat lower. How my chest no longer carried that constant pressure, the invisible weight of being responsible for someone else's stability. I had underestimated how exhausting that responsibility had been. Not because I was incapable, but because it was never meant to be mine alone. I began reconnecting with parts of myself that had been waiting patiently. Creativity returned. Curiosity. Desire, not just romantic desire, but hunger for life, for experiences, for expansion. I stopped asking whether I was too much. I started asking whether situations were enough for me. That shift changed everything. People noticed. Not in dramatic ways, but in subtle ones. Comments like, "You seem different. You look lighter. You don't chase anymore." They were right. I had learned the most dangerous lesson of all. I was okay without being chosen. If you've reached this point in the story, pause and like it. Because getting here means you're ready to stop repeating cycles, not just watching them. One afternoon, months later, I ran into him unexpectedly. There was no tension. No spike in my heart rate. Just recognition. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically, energetically. Like someone who had mistaken momentum for growth. We exchanged polite words. Surface-level updates. He asked if I was happy. I didn't hesitate. Yes, I said. And for the first time, it wasn't a performance. He smiled, the kind of smile people give when they realize a door has closed permanently. Not slammed. Not locked. Simply, closed. When we said goodbye, I felt gratitude. Not for him. For myself. For choosing truth over attachment. For choosing self-respect over nostalgia. For choosing growth over comfort. I no longer needed the story to end with justice served or lessons learned by someone else. The lesson had landed where it mattered. In me. And that's when I realized the real ending of this story had nothing to do with him leaving. It had everything to do with me staying. Staying with myself. There's a version of this story where he never leaves. Where I keep carrying the weight, keep shrinking my needs, keep calling it love because the alternative feels too terrifying to face. But that story ends with me disappearing. This one doesn't. I didn't win by walking away. I won by staying. Staying with the discomfort. Staying with the truth. Staying with the woman I abandoned every time I chose someone else over myself. The day I stopped proving my worth was the day my life began to feel like mine again. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need him to regret anything. I didn't need to be missed to feel valuable. I needed alignment. And alignment changes everything. I learned that love that requires your exhaustion isn't love, it's extraction. That being strong doesn't mean being silent. That loyalty without reciprocity is just a slow betrayal of the self. Most of all, I learned this. If someone can only love you when you're carrying them, they don't love you. They love the relief you provide. And relief is temporary. I still believe in love. Just not the kind that demands self-erasure. I believe in love that meets you where you are. That doesn't panic when you need rest. That doesn't vanish when you finally ask to be held. And until that love arrives, if it ever does, I am enough. I don't chase. I don't audition. I don't explain. I stay. If this story resonated with you, take a second to subscribe, leave a like, and share where you're watching from. Stories like this heal in community. And if you've ever been the one who carried everything, this is your reminder. You don't have to disappear to be loved.